Thank you, Ms. Seema Sinha. And am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So I welcome you all to session 5, day 1 of the Rupkatha International Open Conference 2021. So it's a pleasure for me to invite Professor Saugata Bhaduri, the chair, who will be chairing this session. Professor Bhaduri is affiliated with the Center for English Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, India. His research interests include literary and cultural theory, popular culture, translation and comparative literature studies, and the cultural history of colonial Bengal. His latest books are Post-coloniality, European Transactions with Bengal, from the 13th to the 19th century, published by Bloomsbury 2020, and the forthcoming book, A Critical History of Bengal Literature by Orient Blackswan in the year 2022. His edited books include Transcultural Negotiations of Gender, Studies in Longing or Belonging, published by Springer in the year 2015, Literary Theory and Introductory Reader, Perspectives on Comparative Literature and Culture in the Age of Globalization, Negotiating Globalization, and Translating Power. I welcome you, Professor, to chair the session, and over to you for the further proceedings.
Right. So thank you very much. I must thank the organizers for having me over to chair this session. I understand that it's just a 1-hour session and in which we have 4 presentations, and I've been told that each presentation should not last more than 12 minutes. So let's stick to the time, so that 12 4s are 48, and after that we'll have 12 more minutes for Q&A and discussion if there are any questions. So without much ado, let us begin with the first presentation. And the first presentation is, and the session is on post-methodologies in history. That's the general rubric of the whole session. And the first paper is Methodology versus Theory, Historical Approaches and the Problematic Field of the Humanities in Postmodernism. And the co-presenters are Tetiana Vlasova, who is a professor and head of philology and translation department at the Dnipro National University of Railway Transport, Ukraine. Olha Vlasova, who's a candidate of philosophical science and associate professor at philosophy and sociology at the same university, and Larysa Martseniuk, who is an associate professor of economics and management department in the same university. So thank you very much, and let's start without any further delay. And you have 12 minutes. Please stick to your time. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt, Professor. We do not have the first presenters. We do not have them with us yet, so we'll move to the second presenters.
Okay.
If that's okay.
So, yes, right. So we move on to the second presentation then. And in case the first presenter doesn't turn up, so in that case, we can have 15 minutes per presentation. So it's Arnab Dasgupta, and his presentation is called The Author is Dead, Long Live the Author, Postmodern Meta-Narratives and the Performance of the Author Function. And Arnab is, let me open if I have his bio note. I don't seem to have it, at least within the in the documents that have been sent to me, but that's all right. The Arnab Dasgupta is the presenter, and so you have 12 to 15 minutes to make your presentation. Please go ahead.
So am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so thank you. So my paper actually focuses on how in meta-narratives the figure of the author performs in a particular manner, so as the author actually kind of stays absent present throughout the text. And I would like to start my presentation with 2 contrary quotations. First is by Eliot. The progress of an artist is a continual self-sacrifice, a continual extinction of personality. Tradition, Individual Talent, T.S. Eliot. Second one is, I write provisions of the truth. I chose the crooked road and take children into dark places. I follow the dance of the pen. And this is by James Coetzee from his text, The Master of Petersburg. Postmodern narratives, with their penchant for self-referential structures and metalingual wordplay, continuously wrestle with the crisis posed by the uncanny, undecidable figure of the author. Despite its alleged aversion towards essentialism and humanism, the postmodern literature seems fixated or even fascinated by the author effects and author figures. In his famous essay, The Death of the Author, Rolla Barthes wrote, "Writing is that neutral, composite, oblique space where our subject slips away, the negative where all identity is lost, starting with the very identity of the body writing." This constitutes the central argument in Barthes' famous pronouncement of the death of the author. This death of the author, and in extension, the death of the subject, is synecdochically projected as a defining feature of the postmodern project. However, as David Attell makes us aware, that Barthes' idea of dismantling the author as a cultural institution should not be confused with what he has to say about the psychic and existential demands of authorship itself. Barthes himself acknowledges in Authors and Writers that not that the author is a pure essence, he acts, but his actions is immanent in its own instrument, language. For Barthes, the author is a man who radically absorbs the world's why in a how to write. Author is then a uniquely formed, giving energy, functional through the language he uses within a particular cultural discourse. However, this figure of the author in realist texts usually stays confined to the boundaries of the literary texts, and it is very strange and uncanny when the figure of the author nominally invades the central textual territories. Bakhtin writes in his early essay, Author and Hero in Aesthetic Activity, that the author must be situated on the boundary of the world he is bringing into being as the active creator of this world. He declares, for this institution into that world destroys its aesthetic stability. However, it is this very destruction of the aesthetic unity and stability of the text through the uncanny presence of the author is sought in many postmodern novels as a performative device to highlight the literariness of literature. But the presence of this figure of the author must not be conflated with the historical and cultural figure of the author. As Lyotard makes it clear in the postmodern condition that postmodernity is essentially characterized by a disruption where the aesthetic object is detached from the temporality of original creation and repetition so as to no longer be a commodity circulating between artist and critic. This detachment of the aesthetic object from its source of creation frees the aesthetic object or the text from the tyranny of the historical author. Thus, what haunts the text in the postmodern novels then is not the historical figure of the author, but what Foucault calls the author function, which does not develop spontaneously at the attribution of a discourse to an author. It is rather the result of a complex operation which constructs a certain rational being that we call author. J.M. Coetzee, as a writer who is central to any discussion of postmodern novel of our contemporary times, probes continuously into the figure of this apologetic author, along with issues of nature of writing and relationship and responsibilities the writer shares and owes to writing. 4 of all his novels written till date, Poe, Master of Petersburg, Elizabeth Costello, and Sloman, extensively deal with the performative of the author figure, nature of writing, and relationship between the writer and his work, where the writer invents and is simultaneously is reinvented by his creation. This theme of performative of the author figure is also central to Coetzee's quasi-memoirs. Taking up this theme of reinvention of the author by his creation, Coetzee speaks to the fictive figure of Robinson Crusoe in his novel lecture, He and His Man, where Crusoe, an old man from Bristol, writes to Defoe into existence. In the evening, by candlelight, he will take out his paper and sharpen his quills and write a page or two of his man. This paper seeks to explore this artistic performativity and relationship between the author and his man. This paper focuses particularly on one of the early novels of Coetzee, The Master of Petersburg, where Coetzee explores the issue of authorship and responsibility and dares to place the master, that is Dostoevsky himself, at the center of the text, deriving from Dostoevsky's poetics and from the historical figure of Dostoevsky himself. Coetzee in his text, as he does in his another text 4, examines and imagines from margin the disruptive process of creation of one of the European classics, that is Dostoevsky's Devil. I will attempt not only to explore the intertextual junctions in the text where history, meta-narrative, and fiction interact, but would also like to survey the uncanny effects of the active presence of the artists, author figures of fictive Dostoevsky and autobiographical Coetzee in the text. The performative of the author figure in The Master of Petersburg is initiated with the return of fictionalized Dostoevsky to Petersburg in the Russian autumn of 1869. Dostoevsky, both fictional and historical, at this time was staying in Dresden to escape his creditors, and the cause of his journey is to collect the personal effects of his stepson Pavel, who is found dead in mysterious circumstances. However, Pavel's personal papers include a highly seditious terrorist hit list, which is in custody of the Tsarist police. And in his effort to get back his stepson's personal effects from the police, Dostoevsky gradually gets implicated into an antagonistic relationship with the authority. He also comes into contact with Nechayev, the historical as well as the fictionalist, nihilist, and anti-Tsarist, who is apparently suspected of killing Pavel. Dostoevsky moves into Pavel's former lodging and initiates a passionate and, in some respect, therapeutic relationship with the landlady, and also gets attracted towards her younger daughter Matryoshka, who shared a deep and affectionate relationship with Pavel. These incidents, circumstances, desires, and emotion, Coetzee goes on to suggest, form the intrinsic core of Dostoevsky's writing, specifically the novel Devils, which Dostoevsky was writing at this point of his life. More particularly, as Coetzee suggests, Dostoevsky's unacted desires are source of moral carnality of the character of Stavrogin in Dostoevsky's Devil. And in an act of meta-commentary, Coetzee names the last chapter of his novel on Dostoevsky's anti-hero, Stavrogin. Thus, following Bakhtinian dictate, the author figure of Dostoevsky, as presented by Coetzee, does not renounce his own consciousness, but broadens and rearranges it in the consciousness of the hero or the anti-hero. Literary fiction, argues Derek Attridge in Singularity of Literature, involves the performative of the fictionality, occupying as the experience of an event or a series of events, whereby the characters and occurrences apparently being referred to are in fact, and without this fact being disguised, brought into being by the language. This performance of fictionality is the constitutive force in Coetzee's transfiguration of the fictionalized Dostoevsky from his historical counterpart, as we are made aware of several departures which Coetzee made from his historical biography of Dostoevsky. The real Dostoevsky was survived by his son, for instance. Commenting on the discrepancies between the biography of Dostoevsky and Coetzee's production of Dostoevsky's life, B.J. Leatherbarrow writes in Dostoevsky's Devil, a critical companion, and the Master of Petersburg. Interestingly, if historically unreliable, fictional account of the period in Dostoevsky's life when he was working on the Devils, but Coetzee does not rely on his historical figures and events to some extent in his conceptualization of the plot of the Master of Petersburg. Most notable historical influence for Coetzee is the figure of Nechayev, the nihilist and anarchist who was involved in the murder of the fellow student Ivanov, an incident which is also the source of Dostoevsky's Devil. Dominic Head opinionates in Cambridge Introduction to James Coetzee, at the heart of the novel is the confrontation between Nechayev and Coetzee's Dostoevsky, and this confrontation links the novel's central ideas pertaining to the question of fathering, authorship, and morality. The author narrator of Master of Petersburg, the author function of Dostoevsky, is ontologically troubled by the same tormenting questions and dilemmas which are faced by young John of Coetzee's quasi-memoir Youth. Both of them are troubled by the problem of striking a balance between the demands of the life of a writer and those of self-censorship. To what extent a complete self-expression is possible and desirable without infringing on the bounds of the ethical. For John, in Youth, the question of what should be permitted to go on into his diary and what kept forever shrouded goes to the heart of all his writing. He wonders, and I quote from Coetzee, if he is to censor himself from expressing ignoble emotions, how will those emotions ever be transfigured and turned into poetry? In comparison, Dostoevsky seems a bit more assured about the relationship between the private life of the author and the work of fiction. Thus, when Dostoevsky is asked by the police investigator Maximov, is story a private matter, would you say? The master replies, a private matter, an utterly private matter, private to the writer till it is given to the world. But the moment the private matter is given to the world, it becomes an event of betrayal. Dostoevsky betrays Pavel and prevents the act of mourning for his stepson by impregnating it with the business of writing. This artistic perversion produces an entirely unfavorable portrait of Pavel and is reflected in his characterization of Stavrogin, which is leaves behind for Matryoshka to read, which again is a betrayal of the trust of the young girl. These acts of betrayal, which the author figure engages in continuously throughout the text, stems from the author's absolute responsibility towards the artistic recreation. In Gift of Death, Derrida describes absolute responsibility as an absolute singularity. It is not a responsibility, at least it is not generally responsibility or responsibility in general. So it must therefore be irresponsible in order to be absolutely responsible. For an author to be absolutely responsible to his work, then he or she has to be irresponsible to all others' ethics. This absolute responsibility author towards act of writing is well delineated by the author figure of Dostoevsky in the chapter Starovogin, where he describes the act of writing as betrayal. And I quote, betrayal of love, first of all, and then of Pavel, and the mother and child, and everyone to be turned to another use, to be gripped to him and fall with him. Dostoevsky, in the final cosmic vision in his Master of Petersburg, as a creative writer, confronts God. After writing the pages on the perversion of Stavorgin, which in reality is a perverted transcreation of Pavel's character, Dostoevsky realizes that he pays a great price for his writing. For Dostoevsky, visualizes Matryoshka echoing the same sarcastic comments about his writing as his dead son Pavel. And I quote, they pay him lots of money for writing books. But Dostoevsky laments that both Pavel and Matryoshka failed to understand that he had to give up his soul in return. This giving up of soul implies that writing is a performative act where the writer must pose the other in order to write. Stephen Watson very aptly writes about Master of Petersburg, and I quote, to write one has to transgress, to be divided, even double. But to be double is to open oneself to the possibility of being overtaken by another voice. This voice may be anything but benign. It may even be that of devil himself. This act of doubling is also performed by Coetzee, who opens up to being overtaken by Dostoevsky's voice as well his writing, particularly in his novel Devils. Devils is important for Coetzee as it is in this novel Dostoevsky takes his last steps in exploration of limits of secular confession. In the Master of Petersburg, his strategy for confronting the limits of secular confession is an intertextual engagement with demons and devils, and most particularly with the suppressed chapter.
Okay, Arnab, sorry to interrupt. First of all, I mean, your time is almost up, so please wrap up. And second, the organizers have asked me to ask you to put your camera on, if you can. But also, please conclude because your time is practically over. So please conclude. Yes, thank you.
Sir, I think my camera is on. Is it?
Yeah, you're visible now. I mean, that was a message from the organizers. I really have no control over that. I just communicated it to you. But my message is that your time is up. So please conclude. Okay.
Yes, sir. So what I want to say in conclusion is that in Master of Petersburg, issues like function of the words, authorship, ethics of reading and writing are delineated in debates between Nechayev and Dostoevsky. While Dostoevsky places emphasis on the responsibility taken on by the authors of ideas, Nechayev promotes a heady freedom in which there is no such necessary connection between speech and thought. He says, I can think one thing at one minute and another at another, and it won't matter a pin as long as I act. But in a rather interesting and subversive move, even this ethical responsibility of the author towards an idea is challenged by Coetzee's fictive Dostoevsky. Coetzee suggests in the novel that Dostoevsky developed his fiction devil from the diary entries of his stepson Pavel, thus negating the idea of a responsible author god. This is quite akin to what Barthes writes in Death of the Author. Text is not a line of words releasing a single theological meaning, but a multidimensional space in a variety of writings, none of them original, blend and clash. For both Barthes and Coetzee, who was much influenced by the former, readers' authority is of great importance. Barthes illustrates in the Death of the Author that the reader is a space on which all the quotations make up a writing are inscribed without any of them being lost, and Coetzee illustrates the same to the very title of the Master of Petersburg, where Coetzee seems to mock the author figure of Dostoevsky as the master, as burdened by his subjectivity, historical materiality, curtailed by censorship and personal mourning. The author figure of Dostoevsky in Master of Petersburg is anything but the master. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would request all the speakers to please stick to the time. And we move on to our second presentation, which is by Malek J. Zuraikat, who is from the Department of English, Yarmouk University, Jordan, and Haneen al-Nawasreh, who's an independent researcher based in Jordan. and their presentation is called The Party of Evil Genius in Orwell's 1984. So let's move on to these two presenters, and you have 12 to 15 minutes. So please keep a watch on the time so that I don't have to interrupt you, right? Thank you. Please begin.
Okay, thank you, sir. Let me just share the screen. Okay. So as it appears here, our presentation or our research is about the party of evil genius, the party of evil genius in Orwell's 1984. So, okay. Okay. So the title of our publication is The Party of Evil Genius in Orwell's 1984. So let's start first about giving a general summary of the topic of our research. The research topic, there are two questions that I'm posing here. Why choosing such concept and applying it to Orwell's 1984? And second, what is the relevance of it in postmodern era? So first, why choosing such concept and applying it to this specific novel? What is the significance of that? We believe that Orwell's 1984 depicts a world that is dominated by dystopian themes, that it was supposed to be a utopia, but it turns to be a dystopian world. So now this thing, we think that it has a connection to the concept or the notion that we are discussing here, which is the evil genius. We think that the evil genius has the power to turn the real world into illusion and the illusional world into a real one. So this concept is present heavily in such dystopian words and dystopian fiction. Now, regarding the second one, what is the relevance of it in postmodern era? We think that this theme or this notion, this hypothesis is significant in the postmodern era because it is never out of date, even though it was written long time ago, but it is never out of date. And there are some similarities between the experience of the Winston, which is the main character in the novel, his experience of victimization, and people's feeling of being victimized by such power or such the bars modern society. Okay. Now, the main argument or thesis of our research is that, relying on Descartes' definition of evil genius, we argue that the party in 1984 uses delusional propaganda, memory, resetting, and doublethink as strategies to convince people of the significance of Big Brother for their peace and prosperity. Thus, the paper examines the party's approach towards Winston, who has always been suspicious of the party, contending that the party successfully toys with Winston's mental and emotional perspectives, thus leading him to view his own ego or rationale as his worst enemy. So to summarize this argument or this thesis of our research, we have that such evil genius can switch between different levels of one's intellect and emotions, and then reaching his own ego. Now, I want to identify just the concept of the research to make things clear. the main concept or notion is evil genius, as it appears from the title of our publication. Now, evil genius is a figure that manipulates people's mind and controls their experience of the external world. This is a general definition of the evil genius. And he is, which is the evil genius, is a concept that refers to a person with an exceptional capacity for wrongdoing and malevolence. Now, we have the characteristics of such evil genius. He is powerful, cunning, malicious, knowledgeable, deceitful, and marvelously creative figure, intentionally misleads people and creates illusions which eventually suspend their thoughts once they think of anything is real. Now, these are the characteristics of such power, we can say. Now, relying on Descartes' definition, I have this quote to support these characteristics. Descartes emphasizes that evil genius of the utmost power and cunning has employed all his energies in order to deceive humans. Now, the methods of our research is that first we have, or the strategies that the party of evil genius uses in order to manipulate people in this novel are, we have 4 of them in this research. We discussed 4. 1, delusional propagandas, which is spreading, fabricating news, and making such illusional enemies. And second, which is the memory resetting, which is a dangerous and powerful strategy to use. There is where all the documents that conflicts with the party's thought or policy are burned in this hole. And the third one is forging history and making it a matter of opinion. Now, this includes like creating illusional enemies and creating illusional enemies, or creating individuals that support the party's policy and then demolish them all at once. Now, the fourth one, which is the most important one of these, which is double think. Now, this strategy is used to control reality. Now, this strategy, now it has to do with something to reconstruct what is right and wrong for these people, and making all these contradictions, like having or holding 2 opinions all at once, and then believing in them both. These are the strategies. Now, finding or results of the research is that there are 2 main ones, which are, in fact, this study contends that evil genius in Orwell's 1984 is a nightmare that cannot be overlooked or seized, as it can manipulate established facts, including mathematics, and can convince people that their beliefs are pointless, thus ironically acquiring people's admiration to its way of deception. Now, this is the first one. We have the literature review, which most of the critics agree that such power is limited. But in our research, which we can consider it as a contribution, or what this research provides, it provides that such power is, such evil genius is so powerful, and it cannot be finished just by identifying it. Now, the second one is that the party successfully toys with Winston's mental and emotional perspectives, thus leading him to view his own ego, or rational as his or toys with different levels, like consider them both as the psychological set of the humans and playing with their thoughts and thinking. And finally, getting access to their ego and convincing them that the worst thing, like I'm just rephrasing what is said in the novel, is that O'Brien said to Winston that the worst thing is self-deception. Like being self-deception is worse than being deceived by others. Okay, now the conclusion and the final messages of this research, I chose to end with a quote, which is, as Harold Camping claims, we could say that the world has officially come into the age of terror. A fictional story of terror now supposes there was someone in the world who was a very, very evil person, and yet he has had a very brilliant mind. This evil genius sends messages. Now, this part, we see this kind of thinking all over the world today. Now, also, it is cited in the novel that this scenario or drama will be repeated again and again from the past and to present and then into future, but of course in different ways according to the eras that this evil genius living in. No, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Haneen, and thank you particularly for sticking to the time allocated to you. And we move on. You can please stop your presentation so that we can get the screen to us. And we can move on to the third presentation for this session, third and final presentation by Dr. Giovanni B. Corvino. And his presentation is titled Exploring School Segregation During Racial Lynchings in the United States, the cases of Brown versus Board of Education, 1951, and Boiling versus Sharp, 1952. And to just give you a bio note so Giovanni is a PhD candidate in Global History of Empires at the University of Turin in Italy. So yes, Giovanni, and your 12 to 15 minutes begin now.
Thank you for the floor. And yes, my presentation is about school segregation in the United States, exploring two cases specifically. So this presentation aims to explore how school segregation in the United States was fought through Brown versus Board of Education and Boiling versus Sharp, when white supremacists strongly supported the Jim Crow segregation laws. Simultaneously, the cases of lynching of African Americans continued to take place, reinforcing the spatial confinement to which Blacks were subjected, according to the separate but equal segregationist principle. In the United States, as many of you already know, school segregation has a long history. The 18th century protests were led by a large number of African Americans in Boston, for example, including Prince Hall. They argued to the state legislature that the money paid with their taxes neglected their children's schools services. The promulgation of the Jim Crow laws in 1877, in effect until 1964, did not allow complete fairness of treatment between whites and blacks, but rather enforced racial segregation in the southern United States. So African Americans continued to be victims of lynching during this period, albeit less frequently than in the previous years. With the aim of reestablishing the previous Pro-13 Amendment racial hierarchies, the numerous episodes of racial violence endorsed and promoted the segregationist practices that could count on government support, thanks to the laws that only apparently seemed to sustain the principle of fairness. Even Black scholars were not allowed to participate in almost any academic conferences in the South and many northern cities in the wake of social exclusion. They did not even have the opportunity to join in training and contribute to Black history teaching. Therefore, school segregation did not allow the education of young Blacks. Consequently, many African Americans, parents and not, worked together with civil rights organizations, including the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, to fight segregation in public schools and the racial inequality. Although the efforts in questioning discriminatory policies in schools, they reached small achievements. Rethinking Brown versus Board of Education in 1951, Linda Brown, a Black student living in Kansas, in the city of Topeka, had to attend a school further away than her home as she was refused enrollment in a white school near where she lived. This refusal was based on the Kansas discriminatory law on school segregation between whites and blacks if the city had more than 15,000 inhabitants. This, in the case of Topeka, was applied only to primary schools. That's why Linda Brown's father decided to appeal to the court. A real class action emerged in which Brown was simply the first name in the alphabetical order of a long list, but Brown versus Board of Education case owed its names to Esther Brown, a white Jewish woman unrelated to Linda's family. One day, while she was accompanying home her black domestic to South Park, she was deeply disturbed by the condition of the elementary school reserved for black children. Despite her commitment to the school board, the situation did not improve. Indeed, history realized that there was no desire to change what was going on, so much so that while the school continued to fall apart, funds were being raised to build a new one reserved only for white children. Incredulous in front of what she found out, she started a series of actions that made her become a real activist for the advancement of the African Americans' civil rights. The rebellion against the oppressive white system led to the core of Esther Brown's devotion for the African Americans' cause. Segregation in South Park primary schools was eventually brought down, not successfully, unfortunately, at the cost of many repercussions on the protagonists' private lives. For example, Esther Brown had a miscarriage, her husband lost his job, and a cross was burned in the garden of her home, by the Ku Klux Klan, of course. Nevertheless, she decided to devote herself to the case of Topeka and to fight school segregation. Thurgood Marshall assisted the instance with support of the NAACP. Marshall was a prominent black lawyer and then became judge of the Supreme Court. The main obstacle was the appeal by the federal court, since the black and white schools had no difference in terms of teaching quality and service offered. But despite this, the school for blacks to which Linda was destined was much farther than that for whites, so much so that she had to walk in the morning, take a bath, and wait 30 minutes for the opening of the school. So thanks to the NAACP commitment and investigations between 1951 and 1952, similar cases were found in South Carolina, Virginia, Delaware, and many other southern states. Following social protests by the Black community, the state Supreme Court in Delaware decreed instant admission to the school initially reserved for whites for all those who had appealed. So the federal government, at the time still under Truman's administration, decided to intervene as the amicus curiae, that is a legal expression used to refer to anyone who voluntarily offers information to the court on an aspect of the law or other parts of the case, provided that she is not in the party. The Supreme Court expressed its doubts about the constitutionality of segregation. And it also pointed out that what was happening was detrimental to the image of the United States and its foreign policy. We are in the years of the post-Cold War. So despite this, the judge called to decide had conflicting opinions. As a result, the decisions on the case was postponed to the following year. Eisenhower elections as the new president of the United States of America from 1953 to 1961 marked a change. With his entry into the political scenario, the advancement of civil rights was not treated as in the previous administrations. I'm referring to Truman's administration and in part also to Roosevelt's administration. So Eisenhower White House was not interested in listening to Black politics, so much so that it did not include meetings with African Americans representatives on its agenda. But with the death of Frederick Moreau Vinson, Earl Warren was appointed the new president of the Supreme Court in office during this change and for the case of Brown versus Board of Education. With his valuable contribution, segregation in schools was declared unconstitutional, thus imposing an end to it in 1954. However, in 1952, in conjunction with the NAACP investigations into school segregation, another critical case occurred on the same topic. It offers curious parallels with Brown versus Board of Education, thanks to the similarity they have in common. Still, at the same time, its features make it unique, so much so that it has a different judgment. Washington, the federal capital, was the place of the origin of the case. The peculiarity of Bonnie versus Sharp case is answered in the application of the 14th Amendment. It provides citizenship for everyone born on the United States territory, and therefore to benefit from a whole series of rights. Furthermore, it establishes the due process, that is, the impossibility of any state to remove any property from a citizen or even to decide on his or her life in the absence of legal decisions, thus granting anyone and extend equal protection. It's precisely on the latter that Brown versus Board got its win. However, as the 14th Amendment does not apply to the federal government but only at state levels, Brown's reasoning versus Board cannot also include Bonnie versus Sharp case. Fortunately, the 5th Amendment contained the due process, but only tied to the federal government, which is why the 14th Amendment was promulgated for the states. Referring to the result obtained with the Brown case, it was believed that, and I'm quoting directly from the Supreme Court decision, in view of our decision that the Constitution prohibits the states from maintaining racial segregated public schools, it would be unthinkable that the same Constitution would impose a lesser duty on the federal government. So, Chief Justice Warren thus stated that racial segregation that occurred so far was a clear violation of the law in force, which had the task of protecting the rights of African Americans. On May 17, 1954, the end of the case was unanimously decided, establishing the unconstitutionality of racial segregation in public schools. In conclusion, the Supreme Court struck down public school segregation in the landmark case of Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, as we stated above. But only 2 years after the victory, the Declaration of Constitutional Principle was signed to criticize this new verdict and condemning any racial integration in public spaces, in public spaces and places. Therefore, the Supreme Court was accused by 101 of 128 Southern congressmen of having abused of judicial power, with the promise of making sure that, and I quote directly from a declaration of one of them, all lawful means to bring about a reversal of this decision, which is contrary to the constitutions and to prevent use of force in its implementation. Indeed, many southern cities chose to reject integration with aggressive form of violence, despite the verdict of the Supreme Court. And this form of aggressive violence were like lynching or other similar form of mob violence. For example, when the small town of 1,500 citizens in Manfield, Texas, welcomed the 12 black students, they rioted in opposition. On the morning of August 30, 1965, armed white protesters marched on the streets to block black children from registering to school. And it was just one of the many cases that occurred in the year to come. Today, there is evidence from many different studies that demonstrate the disparities between the education opportunity that black and white students face daily. Teachers' expectations for students may be a factor in such discrepancies. A recent survey by Herbert and colleagues found that white teachers are less critical in their comments when correcting a black student's assignment. Conversely, teachers are more critical when they think about correcting a white student's assignment. Moreover, according to Gerson's and colleagues' study, a study of only 2016, black and white teachers are subject to an evaluation mismatch when evaluating the educational success of their African-American and Afro-descendant students. Specifically, white teachers are 12% less likely to be successful when they predicting whether the black students will finish high school. On the other hand, in the case of university studies, the percentage of forecast difficulties rises to 30%. So, really concluding, considering these studies, other publishing and ongoing numbers, it emerged that although school segregation was defeated, full integration for black students would seem to have not yet been reached in the United States. Prejudice and stereotypes that white teachers hold about the abilities of black students can negatively affect their ability to learn. Therefore, educational administrators need to identify and avoid racial inequalities in their schools so that full scholastic integration can finally take place. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Giovanni. And you two can please close your presentation so that we can move on to the discussion. So we do have, as we always thought, around 12 to 13 minutes for discussing the three presentations, and which is good. And we can discuss them one after the other in terms of questions and answers put forth. As also, if there aren't any questions and answers, I can myself probably comment on them and also pose questions. So just to sum up, the first presentation, as you would remember, was on the category of the author, and Arnab, the presenter, took us through, first of all, almost the resurgence of the category of the author, or the obsession with the category of the author within contemporary postmodernist literature, and he took us to the usual theorizations of the category of the author through Barthes, through Foucault, and primarily focused on Crusoe and Crusoe's almost fictive reconstruction of Dostoevsky, the author, and he closed with Derrida's notion of the responsibility and irresponsibility of the author. So it was a wonderful presentation on the category of the author, and the presentation is open for questions. Are there any questions? I mean, and the questions could be put in the chat box, or they could be put verbally. And so let's wait for half a minute or so in case there are any questions from the audience. Otherwise, I will definitely have a few comments to put. Okay, so there's a message, but that's not a question. That's a directive from the organizer to all the participants. And
I have a question for one of the authors, who is Arnab. I would like to ask if, in your opinion, postmodern meta-narrative should be taught in high school already, because, for example, in Italy and I could say in the Mediterranean area, postmodern meta-narratives or postmodernism is not really taught in high school. It's mostly in university. So I would like to ask if, in your opinion, should be taught in high school and not only in university.
Okay, to respond to that question, actually, I think it's a very contextual sort of situation, I would say, because the standard of education, I think, varies in different spaces, particularly in case of places where English is not the first language or the most commonly spoken language. I think at times it might be difficult for students in those spaces, in third world countries, actually, if you look at it, to actually grapple with the ideas and the notions which are there in postmodern literature and postmodern novels as such. So, but I think if you look at it, if a proper sort of system is actually in place, such kind of narratives actually can help students understand a lot about the idea of subjectivity, the whole process of writing, because the meta narrative as a genre actually talks about the whole process of writing. And if it is introduced in high school, I think in creative writing courses, actually it can actually help a lot the students how to formulate a particular text in that sense.
Okay, so
thank you. I agree.
Yeah, any further questions for our first presenter? Okay, I had a question about the author figure himself, because Crusoe himself is also an author. So while the master author Dostoevsky is indeed being rewritten, and the performativity of the author is being reorganized, as it were, through Crusoe as a reader, but Crusoe is also an author. So do you think that there is indeed a kind of a giving up of or a dissemination of the author function, or do you think there is a further reiteration and a further almost reconsolidation of the authorial function when an author rewrites an author?
Actually, sir, that's a very interesting take on this particular text, because there is a parallel we can find with Dostoevsky and Coetzee in this particular text, because just as Dostoevsky has written Devil to kind of negotiate this loss, actually in the same time period, Coetzee also lost his son, who had also committed suicide. And when Coetzee is writing The Master of Petersburg, that loss of son kind of gets paralleled with Dostoevsky's loss in the text. So the author figure here also, autobiographically speaking, comes in. And if you look at Coetzee's over completely, if you look at his memoirs, in all his memoirs he is present, and particularly if you look at it, he fictionalizes himself. So in a sense, the figure of the author and the autobiographical points of his life are kind of getting, in a sense, mixed up, and they are becoming a performative. They are not actually real autobiographical points of his life, but he is actually performing himself. In case of Coetzee particularly, if you look at Summertime, for instance, he performs his own death, because that particular autobiography he is writing from the point of a time when he's already dead. He is being referred in a third person who's already dead. So that performative comes also in autobiographical sense, also in sense of fictive narration of the self.
Right. Thank you very much. There was a pointed question for you. I actually thought all the questions were in the chat box, but I realized that there is a separate tab called Q&A. Do you consider Dostoevsky as a postmodern novelist? I'm sure you don't. So you can answer it in yes or no if you so wish, since there is a question directly.
Definitely. There are. You can actually retrospectively put many people in that section, actually, along with Dostoevsky. So
right. So we'll move on to the second presentation, and maybe your presentation on the category of the author already posits the author as a possible evil genius. And that would form the connection between the first presentation and the second presentation, which is about the evil genius, the author who can play, the author who can perform. Is the author himself an evil genius? We'll ask that question in a minute. So let's move on to Haneen and Malek's joint presentation, and which was about the category of the evil genius as in 1984, and the the novel George Orwell's 1984, and how relevant the category of the evil genius today is in our current times, which are themselves plagued by the rise of maybe dictatorships and fascisms and discriminations all around. So any pointed direct questions to Haneen and Malek about the category of the evil genius and how the category of the evil genius plays itself out in 1984, and how the category of the evil genius as foreseen in 1984, connected to dictatorship, connected to dystopia, connected to totalitarian regimes, how that is relevant to our current times. Any direct questions to Haneen? Okay, so then I do have a question, and Haneen did mention Descartes in her presentation, though it was slightly misspelled, but that's understandable, and how Descartes in his meditations gives us this philosophical idea of the evil genius, because evil genius is a philosophical concept. It's not just a common phrase that we have evil genius, it's a philosophical concept. And in meditations, as Haneen also herself pointed out, albeit a little briefly, Descartes talks in details in all the meditations 1, 2, and right up to 6. He keeps talking about the category of the evil genius. Now he connects the philosophical category of evil genius to skepticism. As you would know, Descartes' primary notion relies on the category of doubt. Now the evil genius seems to be that ultimate skeptical figure who doubts everything and who has the capability in him to doubt each and everything. Now, evidently, one may think of the evil genius, therefore, as a positive category too, though in Descartes' opinion, the evil genius therefore always leads one to deception, because how can you doubt even the indubitable? But my question is that in times like ours, when maybe having a far more radical strengthening of absolute doubt becomes a need of the hour, can the evil genius also be subversively a figure that not only embodies the totalitarian regimes, but possibly also the bulwark of resistance that we can build against such totalitarian regimes through a total skepticism, following Descartes' understanding of what the evil genius philosophically stands for. So could the evil genius also have within it the possibility, the category of the evil genius have within it the possibility also of resistance, of questioning regimes, of subverting regimes?
So, sorry for that. Could I say something? First of all, my name is Malek Zuraikat. I had some disconnections, and I'm an associate professor of English literature. Haneen is my student, actually, and I thought that I should give her the opportunity to talk or to have this nice experience with Rupkatha, considering the prestigious status of this journal. Back to your comment, thank you very much for your insightful, definitely, comments, and for the questions you are raising regarding evil genius. Basically, the trigger of the entire paper, as well as presentation, is the fact that in the postmodern society, and I'm just referring to the universe here, we here in Jordan, you probably there in India, I'm not pretty sure, we are just living under the pressure of the global system. Globalism for us is not just a cultural concept, it is a political party. And we do all know that globalism does have its own ideology, similar to any other sort of international, if you wish, system. And we are talking about systems or regimes here, starting from the medieval period, from the Middle Ages, talking about the Crusading era. So after the end of that era and the beginning of colonialism, we do believe as academics that colonialism did never end. Rather, it has been substituted by different, like civilian, if you wish, regimes which are made responsible for manipulating people's affairs and conditions. And in order just to attract more population, like assimilating and adapting the different principles of such colonial systems, we are in a way deceived by different tactics and strategies used or deployed by the global system, basically to substitute our own localities, considering that globalism would view all the time every single local culture as its rival, if not its own enemy. accordingly by using the different tactics as displayed by Orwell in his 1984 against Winston, like trying to manipulate the man, to convince the man that the party, without definitely referring to it as evil party, because just the word evil would just be very like disappointing and fearful for Winston as well as for you and me at the same time. That party would just use different tactics, like introducing itself as being a regime that is hosting a ministry of love, for instance. We do have, by the way, something similar to that in all of our governments, I would just say. So they would just talk like in the name of different humanitarian organizations. They would just talk in the name of human rights, all of that. And we would all the time try to sponsor our different research projects, relying on that, thinking, well, yeah, why not? Why not to follow like an organization that would sponsor my ideas and all of that? But down the way, if you pause at any point and think of what is the benefit of such an organization to sponsor me, the answer would unfortunately be because that party does have its own ideology, which might not be just associated with money. It is always associated with culture, with substituting your and my own culture, localities. I'm just referring to that here, true. Sorry for just being... Sorry for being very bold and like
it's absolutely fine. And that is really the kind of response that we were looking for. We have actually run out of time, but just a minute or so on the third presentation, which was straightforwardly on segregation, the history of segregation practiced in schools and different cases. So direct questions to Giovanni, and it's in a way connected to the second paper, because if the second paper was on totalitarian regimes and discriminatory regimes, it kind of flows into the third presentation too. So we've run out of time, so I will desist from putting any question myself. But is there any question in the Q&A chat box? I can see, okay, that is still on 1984, but about segregation. Is there any question?
Hi, can I have a question?
Yes, please, Bushra. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Dr. Bushra Juhijani from the University of Al-Nahwain in Baghdad. So I wrote about Orwell, and I compared, his novel to
Sorry, Bushra. I'm really sorry to interrupt you. Could we just leave Orwell for the time being? We've really run out of time for this session. If there is a question for the segregation of blacks and whites in schools in the US, that is Giovanni Corvino's.
No, sorry. My question was about Orwell. So
yeah, maybe you can put it in the chat box, and Malek and Haneen can respond to you later.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. I will put it in there. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I'm really sorry for this. Yes, but we could not. We've managed time very well, I must say, but still we are 2 minutes beyond. So I think with my deep apologies to Giovanni, we have to end the session here, but I'm sure there'll be many questions. And this session was on post-methodologies in history. And I think the three papers really flowed into each other. The category of the author himself probably being an evil genius, an evil genius itself being a means to totalitarian regimes, and totalitarian discriminatory regimes themselves bringing in segregation in schools, and all of these being talked about today, probably from our own post-methodological takes on history and our own resistive modes of dealing with it. It was a wonderful session. It was my pleasure to be able to chair it, and I apologize to the speakers in case we have given a short shrift to any of them, but we have to follow the time, and the next session is waiting for us, and we are already 2 minutes behind schedule. So thank you very much, and it was a pleasure, and the conference may continue over to the organizers, and I'll take your leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Perfect.
sir.
Thank you very much, buddy. And for those who are interested in sending us questions, by the way, me and Haneen, just you might email us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, presenters and professor, for chairing this session and wonderful presentations as well. So we'll move on to the next session, session 6 of the first day of Rupkatha International Open Conference 2021. So we'll have a plenary session now on the theme critical dialogue. I am happy to tell you that we have Reverend Professor Nicholas Ametiak